Hello, dear friends. We are sincerely glad to welcome you again, and today we're going to talk to the esteemed Igor Mikhailovich Danilov.
Greetings.
Igor Mikhailovich, in one of the videos when we were summing up the results of the Eye of God experiment, you noted the following point, that even the consciousness of those people who participated in the experiment was shocked when they entered the experiment. Because in the heads of all of us, such cruel scenarios related to unlimited power and impunity emerged and were implemented that even consciousness itself was shocked. And consciousness said, no, don't do that, but we continued to play. Personality was in shock observing this from a side, but we continued to play. And the question arises, who was playing inside us? This question certainly remained unanswered. And our viewers wrote us emails and asked us questions. So, who could be behind this? If it is not consciousness and if it is not personality, maybe it's a subpersonality? Or is there someone or something else inside us who enjoys such things, who desires it, and who influences us so strongly?
Of course, there is. And his name is Satan. This is really true, friends. As much as we might wish it otherwise, no matter how much of materialists we may be, we will have to admit that Satan does exist, and he is inside each of us. Recall the words of the prophet. Recall Jesus Christ, and everything will fall into place. But for those who haven't gone through this experiment, or were going through it without an elementary skill of observing themselves and perceiving themselves as personalities, this point can certainly be missed. Why? Because a person habitually feels within himself dreams, desires, and this very game. But when a person has at least some spiritual experience, everything falls into place. When he already identifies himself as personality, when he clearly understands where and how his consciousness works, and when there appears a force, a powerful force, before which consciousness stops, before which even a human as personality simply becomes a timid little lamb before this wolf. This is the one who enjoys such games. This is the one who turns a person's life precisely into a service to himself, especially if a person has such opportunities as in the experiment, even a little bit. This is really so. And that beast lives in everyone. We are exactly that abode in which that beast exists. Unfortunately, but this is true. You know, he's like the internet. He's in everyone, but he is one. He's in the multitude, but he is one. And it is really a tremendous force. And this is historically confirmed, even for believers. Recall Jesus Christ, how he was tempted for 40 days, precisely by him. And he is the one whom, while looking him in the eyes, we will have to pass through in order to enter heaven, or fearing him, to kneel before him and remain his slave, becoming a subpersonality. Yes, on the one hand, this sounds somewhat fantastical and too religious, like the priests' fairy tales for children, which they habitually manipulate and tell us. But on the other hand, when each person approaches such things, at least this experiment, in a mature, really serious way, he can see firsthand who is inside him, and why sometimes it is actually so hard to simply become a human being, and why it's enough for you just to get slightly distracted, to forget a little bit about God, to forget about His love and mercy, and immediately you realize that you already have a saddle on you, and you are no longer a rider, you are the horse, while the rider is precisely the one who is called Satan in this world, whereas consciousness is merely his tool. And the paradox is that many people have really faced the fact that even consciousness was against the experiment. Consciousness didn't even want to generate pictures. However, the force making consciousness do that was very powerful. This is indeed so. He is powerful, but even he cannot do anything to a person if the person is truly on the spiritual path and his goal is life eternal. That's true.
You know, Igor Mikhailovich, what you've said that Satan is actually one is also very interesting. The thing is that our friends who participated in the experiment have shared what feelings and what inner states they were experiencing when they entered the experiment and throughout the course of the experiment. They said, we were accompanied by the feeling of deep loneliness.
Right.
Not only did those scenarios emerge, where you remain completely isolated, where you are alone, where you trust absolutely no one, where there is this feeling of paranoid fear, you are in this depressed, heavy, negative state 24/7. And somehow there is this parallel that the system, to be more precise, Satan, is alone. And this feeling of loneliness, this is what was transmitted through people by Satan.
Exactly, by Satan. And people felt the same way. And let's look. Let's repeat this on the example of those people who have power. After all, the same feelings are manifested within them too. Why do they become filled with fears of losing their own power and their own significance? Why do people who are prone to tyranny or who have been in power for too long sometimes, let's be honest, change laws for their own benefit, violate all constitutional rights, and set everything up against people because of their own fears? And those around them also evoke doubts and distrust in those tyrants. And the most awful part is that they also feel threatened by them. They are unhappy people too. Why? Because this beast torments them from within as well. They are constantly thinking about how to protect themselves, how to survive. They feel threats from all sides. They live in that fear. This is really true. While those rulers who live freely, even being in power, remain at least more or less humans, they do not allow Shaitan to take their place on this throne to which people have raised them, but try to remain human, at least inside. Well, it is much easier for such rulers.
You know, it seems like this really helps people in their daily lives, in working on themselves, because a person understands that even though he doesn't have Vajra, but if he observes someone 24/7, if he activates this eye of God, then most likely a desire
And that force,
to use Vajra against someone will automatically arise.
Definitely.
And certainly those inner states.
definitely, what makes this experiment valuable, we've been talking about it in several videos, is that it shows the very essence, the very nature, and, most interestingly, the structure of a human being. Because in fact, we do not know how we are arranged. Practically, our structure is studied very poorly. Yes, it is described in different ways from the perspective of psychiatry and psychology. There are many different theories. But when a person begins to study himself, he encounters such manifestations that are not properly described in any book. Why? Because all those psychiatrists, I'm not saying that they are incompetent. No. As a rule, they are very intelligent and competent people who have such a doctor's subtle intuition. They study by observing other people. But you cannot study consciousness and your inner world by observing others. You can only compare it with what you observe within yourself. Therefore, no matter how much they don't want to, they have to go through this territory. They have to study themselves. However, there's a nuance here. When these psychiatrists are only getting close to the one who manifests in experiments like the one we conducted, they retreat very quickly. Why? Because they understand perfectly well, if they go further into the study, their mind will abandon them. And feeling this, people just leave. and try to describe it by natural processes, by the work of our brain, or by some mental or psychological problems and states of ours. While in reality, guys, the world is the way it is. And when in deep practices, a person actually begins to study detachedly from the position of an observer, gives freedom to his consciousness, and observes interaction of that very consciousness. Even if there is activity of a subpersonality, a person can notice this from the position of an observer as personality, when he, detachedly from himself, not perceiving himself as something integrated and whole, observes what is happening in his, let's say, thinking apparatus or perception of this world, then he starts noticing many interesting things which no book will explain and no doctor will be able to explain. Yes, this way one can easily get to a diagnosis which can be established, but a diagnosis is a defense. It reflects the helplessness of those very doctors who themselves understand that all this is true, who themselves understand that our inner world is tremendous, that it is mysterious and almost unexplored. This is also true.
Once answering the question, what do people not see, you said everything is what people don't see. Right, with every year, with every experiment, and looking inside ourselves, we realize it all more and more deeply.
But you have to agree, this experience is actually beneficial. People really begin to perceive themselves as a complexly arranged community, let's put it so. And this is really good, because people begin to understand where stupid thoughts come from, who generates fears inside a human, who forces him to take rash steps and regret them later on, and who regrets. And the most important thing is that people begin to see who in them is capable of loving God, and who is not, and who is striving for what. Then a person gains a chance to make a conscious choice, and this is worth a lot. Thus, a person gets a chance to make a choice when he realizes and understands who is who and who he is. And look what is interesting. I would like to point this out. We perceive ourselves inside as a single whole. I mean, when we do not really engage in spiritual development, when we do not work on ourselves, when we live, just live like everybody else, then we are a single whole inside. Well, how can it be otherwise? It's actually a human, right?
Any manifestations are us, our character, our habits. I was born this way.
Yes, it's our character,
Yes.
exactly. But outside, we are divided. The problem is that everything is substituted by the one who controls this whole process. Why? Because inside, we should be divided, whereas outside, we should be united. But the reality turns out to be the opposite. Inside, we are united by the strongest one, meaning by that very devil, by his manifestation. Our consciousness, the demon is under him, and we as personalities, as well as subpersonalities, and all the rest are under him. However, we are divided in life in the world. Why? Because this way, we are the buffet.
It is convenient to control us when we are divided.
While the situation should be the other way around. Inside ourselves, in our inner world, we should clearly understand who we are, what consciousness is, and who is behind it all. We should understand and separate what we need as personality and where we should strive, what that very devil imposes on us, and what game the demon is playing with us, who in fact should serve us. And these forces cannot be united. But when we feel ourselves as a single whole, well, as usual, there is such a term, then it means that we do not live. Others live instead of us. And those who live instead of us will never lead us to heaven. Yet, when we are a single whole, we easily believe everything. Let's say, any fairy tales. And why is such perception so beneficial for? Let's call the one who benefits the system. We are already accustomed to this term, or speaking the language of religion, that very demon, or rather Satan already, not a demon. A demon is minor, the demon is our consciousness. Why is it beneficial for Satan when we perceive ourselves as a single whole inside, yet are divided in our external world?
Divide and rule. There is such a concept, yes.
Of course, right. Because we form a lot of small egregores. And in this way, we create a lot of dishes for his feast. In fact, he needs nothing but food. In other words, no matter how banal this is, he needs energy and nothing else. And this is really so.
But if people are united,
Especially if they are united on a good, positive idea, then metamorphoses begin. A single egregore of people is formed precisely on their unification, on the idea as a goal. But there is also a point here. If people are united, let's say, on the idea of revolution, what will it lead to? Whom do they serve? On whose idea? If on the idea, let's say, on the aspiration and idea from personality, this is wonderful. If united on the ideas from a demon, that's dangerous. Such unification will always entail someone's power, blood, and so on. Again, we run into power, They might think we are against power. No, friends, we are not against power. But let's speak honestly. What is power? And that's where it gets funny. Power is what deprives a human of paradise. And no matter how you look at this, that's true. The higher the power, and the more impunity a person can have when using that power, the more people suffer. And if a person makes people unhappy and forces them to suffer, or creates such conditions where people suffer, can that actually give this person spiritual freedom? It cannot. In other words, a person dooms himself. And again, what does such a person seek? To unite society? No. He does everything to divide society. Again, in order to feed the system. But if people unite exactly on the ideas of, let us simplify, love for God, on what is the purest and the holiest, then the devil can no longer feed from this egregore. From people, he can. Why? We are weak anyway. We are still distracted somewhere, whether we want to be distracted or not. But we feed our own consciousness. Hence, in any case, we pay tribute to that very Satan while we are here in this world. However, it will be more and more difficult for him to dominate us. I mean, for Satan. And the more people will be in this egregore, the weaker this demon will be. And the easier and freer people will breathe. Everything is actually simple. And we shouldn't be fooled into thinking that we are such heroes. Recall Jesus Christ. For this is quite illustrative. He refused any kind of power because he understood perfectly well that power is spiritual suicide. And Jesus Christ couldn't take power because he was Jesus. The Prophet Muhammad is the best of men. And indeed, I am deeply convinced that he is the best in all times of this civilization. Why? Because even being in power, he didn't seek it. He really didn't want to ascend to the throne of power. But it happened so. People followed him, and he had to take the responsibility. And look at how he ruled. He was a role model for everyone. Did he use his power to his advantage? No. And he discussed any issue that concerned other people, together with people. He didn't take upon himself, shall we say, the responsibility to feed Satan. And he didn't divide people, he united them. He is indeed the best example of a ruler. Well, Again, could he be tempted? I believe he couldn't. Although he didn't have those tools which El had. Muhammad lived at a time when science wasn't so developed, but he knew how important and necessary it was to develop it, and he did everything, I would say. We should be grateful to him for what we now have in science, for the opportunities that are open to us. You have to understand that for many of our convenient, good and necessary gadgets, various things, mechanisms, and everything else, for all of this, we should thank precisely the Prophet Muhammad. It was his understanding of the importance and value of science that led to a serious impetus and development of this science all over the world. This is life. There are a few people like him. Meanwhile, many people, if they acquire even a little power, begin to exercise it everywhere, not realizing that their actions cause unjustified, undeserved suffering of other people. And this changes their fate. That means it will also be reflected on those who misuse their own power, giving in to the temptations of their demon. Everything is simple.
It is also very interesting about the Prophet how competently he acted. After all, in fact, he really applied this mechanism, which you've been talking about, of homeopathy. He always consulted his companions.
You see, of course, whereas modern authorities, striving to protect themselves, invent various laws, depriving people even of their constitutional rights. And why do they do that? A simple question. Because they are afraid to descend to the level of people. Well, supposedly, one might think this is pridefulness or something else. No, friends, that's not true. That's what we think. That's what the demon tells us in our heads. While in actual fact, why are rulers so afraid of losing their power? Because being in power, they get a lot of vril. We give them our attention. But as soon as they are dismissed from that post, they have less vril. They are left behind the scene. And look, many who used to be, let's say, more popular and loved by people, even after leaving their posts and losing authority, still continue to behave shockingly and be in the public eye. Why? Because they keep gathering the power of vril. The question is, what for? To control us. If a person is in charge, he needs power in order to control the crowd, and things like that. But when such leaders leave, why do they become broken? Why are they filled with fear? Well, everything is simple. The more you get, the more tribute you pay to Satan. No one will ever manage to wiggle out and gain power from God. All power comes from the prince of this world, and he takes tribute for that. And having become his slave, you will eventually feel the same as he does. This anguish, this loneliness, emptiness, futility, and a whole lot of fears. Do you know who experiences more fears than anyone else? Their Creator. Because he is exactly all these fears. But if a person lives in God's love and is being filled with this love, and his goal is eternal life, then all these fears, just like the dust from the road is washed away by the rain, and so it is here, all fears are washed away by God's love. Look how simple it is to be happy, to look honestly into each other's eyes, to look honestly into the eyes of the spiritual world itself, simply because you have an open door to God inside of you, and you do not close it. As for those who make a deal for the sake of some benefits, momentary benefits, and in the hope that tomorrow everything will be all right, and that tomorrow where nothing is all right. But a person hopes and puts on himself this load, this burden that brings him down to hell. Everything is very simple. I'm not saying that power, any power, unambiguously leads to the state of subpersonality and hell. No, but the risks are huge, and not everyone is able to withstand this onslaught, this pressure of Satan. But there are examples in history when people, even being in authority and possessing great power, remained wonderful people and faithful to Allah. You see how simple everything is. Everything depends on you and whose side you are on. But when you are with God, even being in power, you do not offend people. You do not ruin their destinies. And when it comes to a person's life and his destiny, you will never take that burden on yourself. You will consult honest people and ask the person himself. Yet if everything is as usual, then you will take that burden. But this is a choice. Everything depends on one's choice. God is very merciful, and He allows us to make that choice, regardless of whether the choice is right or wrong. We, people, are endowed with the freedom that God has given us. We are endowed with the freedom of choice to live or to die. And it seems to me that this is indeed the highest gift, the gift of choice. In other words, we ourselves choose what to be, to live or not to live. Everything is very simple. But the devil is the devil, to seduce and to tell fairy tales. Well, fairy tales don't make you fool.
It is also very memorable that the devil and the system do not favor traitors of God either.
They don't.
He treats badly those people who showed this weakness, departed from God, and bowed down to Satan.
Of course.
I mean, he doesn't value them, their qualities, or them as human beings in general. Yes, right.
But what are actually the qualities of a traitor? Someone who betrays once can betray twice. That is why even Satan doesn't like traitors, even though he himself creates them. Such is the world. The world is arranged in a very interesting way. It is really so complex. We still have so much, I would say, to learn, to make a huge number of discoveries. But instead of evolving, instead of exploring the world and making our lives better, we continue to divide, to fight against each other, to play at power, and so forth. And the worst thing is that we make a lot of mistakes, which later on inevitably affect our future. That's what is bad.
It is very inspiring, Igor Mikhailovich, that there is force in unity on what is good, that it is such a completely different fraction in essence, a completely different quality of energy. As we discussed, that there is gaining of God's love, that gaining is exactly this purity. In the same way, when people open up to each other, when they go towards each other, when there is this very unification on what is pure,
the world is changing.
The world is changing.
But I will say one more thing, friends, that the more people begin to unite on what is light, good, and beautiful, the more dirt manifests around, the more demons begin to attack, and the more those in power begin to be nervous. This is normal and natural. Despite the fact that people unite on a good idea, on love for God, they do not pose any threat to anyone, especially to those in power. But the demon starts freaking out. That's why he's a demon.
Because he cannot fill his bottomless stomach.
Absolutely right.
Something passes him by.
You see, a unification of people poses a threat to Satan himself, because it can really reduce his power. It's impossible to deprive him of power in this world. It is his world. But to remove his dictatorship and make him live according to certain laws is possible. That's what he is afraid of. In fact, just like any dictator. Look how everything is fractally repeated. And, likening themselves to Simeon, people begin to engage in simony. Only Simeon engaged in simony, likened himself to Jesus Christ, while people liken themselves to the devil if they gain such an opportunity, but only when they do not have God's love inside, and when they do not really strive for life eternal, but enjoy the life they have now and hope for a future, supposedly better life. You know, friends, I'll put it this way. If we live in the past, we don't live. If we hope for the future, we don't live. We are living precisely now. If there is no God's love in you now, you are not living. You are just plunging into the past or trying to dive into the future. But you are not here and now, whereas life is exactly here and now. It is not in the past, and it is not in the future. This is worth remembering, and we should start with simple things: to love God and to love one another. So friends, let's just love one another. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, friends. Peace and God's love be with you.